I found a lost letter from my childhood, and it exposed my family's darkest secret. I never expected to find the letter. It was buried deep in an old wooden chest, tucked behind stacks of faded photographs and brittle birthday cards. I had returned to my childhood home after years away, cleaning out my late grandmother's attic before the house was sold. The smell of dust and forgotten memories filled the air as I rummaged through the boxes, each one filled with remnants of a past I had long since left behind. Then, my fingers brushed against something unusual. A small yellowed envelope, sealed but worn at the edges, addressed to me, Eleanor Whitmore, age 10, in a familiar, looping handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't remember ever receiving this letter. With shaking hands, I tore it open, my eyes scanning the words written inside. Dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, it means I failed. I tried to protect you, but the truth has a way of finding its way to the light. You deserve to know what happened all those years ago. You deserve to know who you really are. But be careful. If they find out you know the truth, you won't be safe. My heart pounded. The letter was unsigned, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my mother's. I swallowed hard, my mind spinning with questions. Failed at what? Who am I, and who was they? I looked through the chest again, desperately searching for more, but there was nothing. Only this cryptic letter from a mother who had never told me a single secret in her life. Except maybe she had, and I had just never known. A strange memory flickered in my mind, something I hadn't thought about in years. The night I turned 10, I had woken up to hushed voices downstairs. My mother had been crying. My father, usually calm and composed, had been pacing furiously. I had barely understood their whispers, but I remembered one word vividly: betrayal. Back then, I had assumed it was a marital argument. But now I wasn't so sure. I had to know more. Gripping the letter in my trembling hands, I made a decision. If my mother had left behind a secret, I was going to uncover it, no matter what it took. Little did I know, I was about to open a door that should have remained locked forever. I sat there for what felt like hours, the letter clutched in my hands, my mind racing. My mother had written this. But when? And why had she never given it to me? A gust of wind rattled the attic window, snapping me back to the present. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. I rushed downstairs, the old floorboards creaking beneath me, and dug through my mother's old desk in the study. I hadn't been in this room since she passed away 2 years ago. Everything was just as she had left it. Dusty bookshelves, an old typewriter, and stacks of forgotten papers. I yanked open the drawers, searching for anything. More letters, a journal, anything that could explain what my mother had tried to warn me about. My fingers brushed against something smooth at the very back of the lowest drawer. A key. It was small, silver, and old. My heart pounded. I knew this key. It belonged to the basement storage room. That room had been off-limits my entire childhood. My parents kept it locked at all times, claiming it was just filled with old junk and nothing for children to play with. I had a feeling that wasn't the truth. Holding my breath, I crept toward the basement door, my fingers tightening around the key. The house felt eerily quiet, as if it were holding its breath too. I slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door creaked open, revealing a set of stairs descending into darkness. A damp, musty scent filled my nose. I flicked the light switch. A single dim bulb flickered to life, casting eerie shadows across the room. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes covered in cobwebs. But my eyes were drawn to one thing immediately. A large wooden trunk in the center of the room. It looked exactly like the chest I had found the letter in. My stomach churned. This was it. Whatever my mother had hidden, it was in here. I knelt beside the trunk and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, I found stacks of old newspaper clippings, medical records, and photographs. The first article I picked up had a headline that sent ice through my veins. Local family tragedy, the disappearance of Charlotte Whitmore. I felt the blood drain from my face. Whitmore, my last name. I snatched up a photograph buried beneath the articles. It was a picture of a little girl, blonde with bright blue eyes. She looked familiar. Too familiar, because she looked exactly like me. But the date on the back of the photo made no sense. It was taken 10 years before I was born. My hands shook as I sifted through more papers. Hospital reports, police statements, a death certificate. Then another letter, this one addressed to my father. I unfolded it, my breath hitching as I read, "She knows too much. If she remembers, we're all in danger." A chill ran down my spine. Who was Charlotte Whitmore? Why did she look exactly like me? And most terrifying of all, what did my parents do to keep her a secret? I sat frozen on the cold basement floor, my hands trembling as I clutched the photograph of Charlotte Whitmore. She looked exactly like me. Same bright blue eyes, same blonde hair, same dimples. But she had vanished 10 years before I was born. My heart pounded against my ribs as I read the letter again. She knows too much. If she remembers, we're all in danger. Who had written this? Who was she? And what exactly had she remembered? I dug deeper into the trunk, my breath shallow, my pulse racing. Hospital reports, psychiatric evaluations, handwritten notes. Some of the papers were marked with red stamps. Patient, Charlotte Whitmore. Status, deceased. I felt sick. The official record said she was dead, but the newspaper articles told a different story. One of a missing child, an unsolved case, and parents who had refused to speak about it. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I needed air. I stumbled up the basement stairs, clutching the photograph in my sweaty palm. The house felt different now, less like the home I had grown up in, and more like a place filled with shadows and secrets. I collapsed onto the couch in the living room, my mind spinning. I needed answers, but there was only one person left who could give them to me. I hesitated, gripping my phone. We hadn't spoken much since my mother's passing. He had always been distant, avoiding deep conversations, brushing off questions about the past. But now I knew there was something he didn't want me to know. I took a deep breath and dialed his number. It rang twice before his familiar, deep voice answered. "Ellie?" I swallowed hard. "Dad, I found something in the basement." Silence. I pressed on. There were newspaper clippings about Charlotte Whitmore. "She looks just like me, Dad. Who was she?" Another long pause. Then a voice I barely recognized. Cold, sharp, unlike the man I thought I knew. "Ellie, listen to me very carefully. Lock the doors. Do not talk to anyone. I'm coming to you now." A shiver ran down my spine. "Dad, what's going on? Why, don't trust anyone, Eleanor. Not even yourself." The line went dead. My hands trembled as I lowered the phone. Not even myself? What the hell did that mean? I stood up, pacing, my mind reeling. Something was very, very wrong. And then, a soft knock on the front door. I froze. I hadn't called anyone else. No one knew I was here, except my father. And he had said he was on his way, which meant whoever was knocking wasn't him. My stomach twisted. I stepped toward the door, peeking through the peephole. A woman stood outside. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with deep-set blue eyes. Something about her face sent an eerie sense of déjà vu through me. Then she spoke. "Charlotte?" I gasped, stumbling back from the door. Number that wasn't my name. That wasn't my name. But the way she said it, like she knew me, made my blood run cold. The knocking grew louder, urgent, desperate. I held my breath. What if my father was right? What if I wasn't safe? Not even for myself? The knocking grew louder, more urgent. "Charlotte, I know you're in there. Please open the door." I pressed my back against the wall, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Charlotte." She kept calling me Charlotte, But that wasn't my name. I was Eleanor Whitmore, wasn't I? My father's warning echoed in my mind. Don't trust anyone, not even yourself. A deep chill settled in my bones. Charlotte, please, it's me, your grandmother. My breath hitched. Grandmother? That wasn't possible. Both of my grandmothers had died before I was born. My parents had told me that my whole life. Had they lied? I edged toward the door, my fingers hovering over the lock. My father would be here soon, but what if this woman had the answers I needed? I swallowed hard and made a decision. Slowly, I unlocked the door. The moment I cracked it open, the woman pushed inside, grabbing my shoulders. Her grip was firm but trembling, her eyes searching mine desperately. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's really you." I jerked away, my heart hammering. "Who are you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't remember me, do you?" I shook my head. Her face crumpled. "Oh, sweetheart, what did they do to you?" A sharp knock sounded behind her. My real front door. I stiffened. My father. Ellie? His voice was firm, controlled, but there was an edge to it, a tension I had never heard before. The woman turned to me, eyes wide with fear. "You can't trust him." My stomach flipped. She must have seen the hesitation in my face because she gripped my hands tightly. "Charlotte, listen to me. He's been lying to you your whole life." They both have. "You were never supposed to know the truth." Footsteps. My father was getting impatient. "Eleanor, open this door right now." The woman's hands trembled. "If you open that door, you'll never know what really happened to you." My pulse thundered in my ears. What really happened to me? A memory flashed in my mind. A hand covering my mouth, muffled cries, darkness. I gasped, staggering back. That wasn't a memory. That couldn't be real. Could it? The doorknob rattled. My father was trying to get in. I had seconds to decide. Trust the father who had raised me? Or the stranger who claimed to be my grandmother? Who called me a name that wasn't mine? Who was I really? And had I just let a dangerous secret inside my house? The doorknob rattled again. "Eleanor, I won't ask again. Open this door." My body went rigid. My father's voice, usually calm and measured, was sharp now, borderline angry. The woman, my so-called grandmother, tightened her grip on my hands. "Charlotte, please, don't let him in. If you do, you'll never know the truth." I was trapped between them. A father who had raised me, a stranger who swore she knew me, and a name I wasn't sure belonged to me anymore. My mind raced. If my father was lying, then opening that door might mean stepping back into the lie. But if this woman was lying, if she wasn't really my grandmother, then I had just let someone dangerous into my house. A memory flickered again. Hands pulling me away in the dark. A woman screaming my name. But what name? Ellie. My father's voice snapped me back. His tone was colder now, impatient. "I know you're scared, but you need to let me in. Right now." The woman's fingers dug into my arms. "He's trying to control you, just like he did before. Please, Charlotte, you have to remember." I clutched my head. "Remember what?" Her voice broke. "That you weren't supposed to be theirs." The room spun. What? I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My father wasn't my father? My mother wasn't my mother? Then who? Bang! I jumped. The front door shook violently. "Eleanor, I will break this door down if I have to." The woman, my grandmother, flinched. "You have to come with me, right now." Panic surged through me. "Go with you where?" Her expression turned desperate. "Away from here, away from him." I stumbled back. I don't even know you." She looked shattered for a moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. A locket. She pressed it into my palm. I stared at it, my fingers shaking as I opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph of me. Except it wasn't me. It was Charlotte Whitmore. The same bright blue eyes, the same blonde hair, the same dimples. And standing beside her, arms wrapped around her protectively, was the woman standing in front of me. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't some random stranger. This woman knew me. I was Charlotte. And my whole life had been a lie. Tears burned my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I was frozen. Then, the front door burst open. My father stepped inside, his face dark with something I had never seen before. Fear. His eyes darted to the woman, his entire body tensed. Then he turned to me. Eleanor, step away from her. Now. My heart pounded against my ribs. Who was telling the truth? And what would happen if I made the wrong choice? The front door slammed against the wall, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. My father stood in the doorway, breathing heavily, his eyes locked onto the woman beside me. But there was something in his expression that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. Eleanor. His voice was sharp, commanding, "Step away from her. Right now." I didn't move. I couldn't. Because now I wasn't sure if I was Eleanor at all. The woman, my supposed grandmother, clutched my wrist. "Don't listen to him, Charlotte." My father's jaw clenched at the name. "Her name is Eleanor," he snapped, "and you have 5 seconds to get out of this house before I call the police." The woman laughed, a bitter, broken laugh. "You won't call them, because then they'd start asking questions, wouldn't they?" She turned to me, her eyes full of sorrow. "They'd start looking into the Whitmore case again. And you know what they'd find?" My father took a step forward. "That's enough." "They'd find out what you did," she whispered. I couldn't breathe. My whole body trembled as I turned to my father. "Dad, what is she talking about?" He didn't answer. His face was unreadable. I took a shaky step toward him. "Charlotte Whitmore, the missing girl, she looks exactly like me." My voice cracked. Why does she look exactly like me? Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt? Panic? The woman's grip on my wrist tightened. "Because she is you, sweetheart. You're Charlotte. You were stolen from us when you were 5. The room spun. "No," my father growled. His voice was ice. "Eleanor, don't listen to her. She's confused. You are my daughter." "Then tell me why I look just like Charlotte Whitmore," I shouted. My chest heaved. "Tell me why my name was in those newspaper clippings. Tell me why—" I stopped, because something inside me clicked. A memory. A woman's voice. Soft. Warm. Singing me to sleep. A lullaby I hadn't heard since I was a child. But it wasn't my mother's voice. It was hers. The woman in front of me. My real grandmother. I gasped. The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the couch to steady myself. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining this. The memories? They were real. My father saw the change in my face. His expression darkened. "Eleanor," he said softly. His tone had changed. Calm. Gentle. Like he was speaking to a wild animal. "You're upset. You're confused. Let's just sit down and talk, okay?" I took a step back. He noticed. His hands clenched into fists. "I raised you. I kept you safe. Everything I did was for you." The woman whispered, "He's not your father, Charlotte." I squeezed my eyes shut. "Stop. Just stop." I couldn't think. My head was splitting open. Who was lying? Who was telling the truth? Then my father lunged. I barely had time to react before he grabbed my arm, yanking me toward him. His grip was tight. Too tight. My grandmother cried out. "Let her go." "She's coming with me," my father growled. "She's my daughter." Tears burned my eyes. Am I? That made him hesitate, just for a second. And in that second, my grandmother grabbed a lamp from the table and swung. Crash! Glass shattered. My father stumbled backward, dazed. Run, my grandmother yelled. Charlotte, run! I ran. Out the door, into the night, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know who I was anymore. But one thing was clear. The man I had called Dad my entire life wasn't the man I thought he was. And if what my grandmother said was true, then he had stolen me. And he wasn't going to let me go. The night air was cold against my skin as I ran, barefoot, heart pounding, breath ragged. Behind me, I heard my father, or the man I had called my father, groaning in pain. He was stunned, but not for long. He would come after me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even know who I was anymore. But I knew one thing. I had to get away. Charlotte, this way. I turned toward the voice. My grandmother, if she really was my grandmother, was already running ahead of me, motioning toward an old car parked at the edge of the street. My legs burned, but I forced myself forward. I threw open the car door and jumped inside. She turned the key. The engine roared to life just as... Bang! Something slammed into the back of the car. I turned. His face twisted with fury, blood trickling down the side of his forehead. He grabbed for the door handle. But my grandmother hit the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as we shot forward. I twisted in my seat, my breath coming in sharp bursts. My father stood in the middle of the road watching us disappear. But he wasn't running after us. He wasn't calling the police. He was just standing there. And then as we rounded the corner, I saw something that made my stomach drop. He was smiling. We drove in silence for a long time. My whole body shook. I didn't know if it was from the cold, the fear, or the fact that my entire life had just been ripped apart. I stared at the woman beside me. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes, they were the same as mine. I swallowed hard. Tell me the truth. She glanced at me, eyes full of something deep and aching. I am. I promise you, sweetheart. I hesitated. You're saying I'm Charlotte Whitmore. Her hands tightened on the wheel. You are Charlotte. You were my granddaughter. You were taken from us when you were 5 years old. My breath hitched. But I don't remember. I don't remember you. I don't remember my real parents. Tears filled her eyes. They erased your past. Brainwashed you into thinking you were someone else? I squeezed my eyes shut. No, this couldn't be real. Why would they do that? My voice cracked. She exhaled shakily. Because they weren't supposed to have you. I turned toward her. What do you mean? She hesitated. Your parents, your real parents, weren't just some ordinary couple. They were wealthy, powerful, and they had enemies. My stomach churned. Enemies? She nodded. Your parents got tangled up in something dangerous. I don't know the full story, but they were being threatened. And then one night you were taken. Disappeared without a trace. My heart pounded. Did they die looking for me? She looked away. I don't know. My body shook. I tried to hold on to something real, something solid, but nothing was. All I had were flashes of memory. A woman singing, a warm embrace, a man laughing as he lifted me in the air. And then, darkness, a gap, a hole where my life should have been. I turned back to her. And my dad? The man who raised me? Her lips trembled. He wasn't just some random kidnapper, Charlotte. She swallowed. He was someone your parents trusted. My breath caught. What? She nodded, her voice raw with emotion. That man was your father's best friend. The truth unfolds. My head spun. The man I had called Dad wasn't just some stranger. He had known my real parents. He had been part of their lives. And then he had stolen me. But why? My voice barely worked. Why would he take me? Raise me as his own? Tears spilled down my grandmother's cheeks. I don't know. But whatever the reason, he didn't do it out of love. I shivered. I had spent my entire life in a lie. But the worst part? The man who raised me knew the truth. And he wasn't afraid. He had smiled as I ran, like he already knew I couldn't escape him. The night stretched on as we sped down the empty road. My mind was unraveling, piece by piece, as the truth clawed its way in. I wasn't Eleanor Whitmore. I was Charlotte. And the man I had called Dad had stolen me. My grandmother's grip on the wheel was tight, her eyes flickering toward the rearview mirror every few seconds. We can't stop. He'll come for us. And I knew she was right. Because when we had driven away, my father— no, not my father— hadn't chased after us. He had just smiled, like he knew something we didn't. A horrible, sick feeling coiled in my stomach. Where are we going? She took a deep breath. I have a friend, someone who can help us get somewhere safe, someone who can prove who you really are. I nodded, though my hands were shaking. How would I even prove it? DNA? Fingerprints? Would anyone believe me? The car lurched. Tires screeched against the pavement. My body whipped forward as the car spun out of control. What? Another bang. I saw the flash of headlights in the mirror. A black SUV, gaining on us. He found us, my grandmother shouted, gripping the wheel as she tried to steady the car. The SUV slammed into us again. I screamed as metal crunched, glass shattered, and the car veered off the road. We hit something. A ditch. A tree, I didn't know. The world tilted, and then I came to with a sharp pain in my head. My vision blurred. The taste of blood filled my mouth. We had crashed. My grandmother was slumped over the wheel, unconscious. And outside the shattered windshield, footsteps approached. Slow. Deliberate. I knew who it was before I even saw him. My father. Or rather, the man who stole me. He crouched beside the wreckage, his face eerily calm. Ellie, he said softly. Not Charlotte. Ellie. The girl he had created. I whimpered, trying to move, but my seatbelt held me in place. My entire body ached. You shouldn't have run, he continued, his voice even. I told you to trust me. I raised you. I protected you. I shook. You stole me. His expression didn't change. I saved you. My breathing was shallow, ragged. You lied to me my whole life. You made me think I was someone I wasn't. His jaw clenched. Because you were never safe with them. His words sent a shiver through me. What are you talking about? His eyes darkened. Your real parents weren't the good people you think they were. They got involved with dangerous people, people who would have hurt you. I swallowed hard. Your father, your real father, trusted me, he continued. He knew things were getting bad. He knew they wouldn't survive. So he made me promise. His voice wavered for the first time. He made me promise to protect you, no matter what. My heart stopped. I had been expecting lies, but this? No, I whispered. That's not true. He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Then why did no one ever find you? Why did no one look for you? Tears burned my eyes. They did. His lips curled into something almost pitying. No, sweetheart. They didn't. Because they knew. The words pierced through me. Could it be true? Had my parents let me go? Had I been living a lie for so long that I didn't even know who the villains really were? I didn't know what to believe anymore. My father, or the man I thought was my father, sighed, rubbing his face. I didn't want you to find out like this. I flinched as he reached for me. Come on, Ellie, let's go home. Something inside me snapped. Number I wasn't Ellie. I was Charlotte. And even if my real parents had made mistakes, even if my life had been built on secrets, he was still a liar. He had stolen me, brainwashed me, kept me in a prison disguised as a home. And I would never go back. I felt something cold against my fingers. Metal. A shard of glass from the wreckage. I wrapped my hand around it. Tight. And just as he reached to unbuckle my seatbelt, I struck. The glass sliced through his arm. He let out a shout of pain, stumbling back. I didn't wait. I scrambled out of the wreckage, running. I heard him behind me, cursing, footsteps heavy on the dirt. "Charlotte, stop!" But I wouldn't stop. Not this time. And then, sirens. Red and blue lights flooded the trees ahead. Police cars. Someone must have seen the crash. Or maybe my grandmother had called before we were attacked. My father, no, my captor, froze. His face twisted in realization. It was over. I stumbled forward, screaming, "Help!" He took me. He took me. Officers ran toward me. Someone grabbed me, shielding me as I sobbed. Behind me, I heard the scuffle, the shouts, the handcuffs snapping into place. It was over. I was free. I sat on the porch of my grandmother's house, staring out at the setting sun. Everything still felt surreal. The DNA test had confirmed it. I really was Charlotte Whitmore. The world had learned my story. The missing girl, found after nearly 15 years. The man who stole me? He was in prison, facing life. But there were still questions. Why had my parents really given me up? What danger had they been in? Were they even still alive? I didn't know, and maybe I never would. But for now, I had a name, a family, a second chance. And that was enough. For now.